So, as part of this group, each time we meet, I want to go through one of the stanzas from the poem Trust and Awakening, which is the newest book that I've written. I retranslated the poem and then provided some commentary. And I want to start by just reading you the ninth stanza, which we're focusing on today, and then we'll do some practice with this, what this is pointing to. So the four lines are: awakening dawns, eclipse, form and absence, no beginning, no end. Sever every opinion. So the first line, awakening dawns, that's a really interesting line because it's understood in the Zen tradition that we all already are awake. We carry awakeness in our consciousness. But it's like the sun in the sky that's been covered with clouds. We take the clouds for the true reality rather than understanding that the sun is always radiant, whether we can directly see it or not. And yet, it does require us to do some spiritual practice, to engage in meditation or contemplative prayer, to really begin to observe our behavior and to try to have our behavior, our outside match our inside. So our behavior match what we understand to be true in our hearts. And this begins the process of a spiritual journey as we both orient towards the maturing of the personality, what I call transformational benefits. And also there's transcendent benefits where we're orienting towards the source, what is called the absolute in Buddhism. We're orienting towards the absolute truth, absolute reality. And by simply orienting to that as we do in meditation, in this case, we were just orienting to the innate goodness quality of our true nature of the absolute, and being willing to make direct, unmediated contact with that, putting down various opinions about ourselves, putting down what we hold as the most true based upon our opinions and our experience in life, and being willing to be fresh and new and not know. Really, not knowing, or what can be called don't knowing, is very important in the spiritual path, because we normally in our society are encouraged to know things, and once we know it, then we take it as a truth. I know this, so this I don't need to question anymore. This is completely true. And in fact, it may be true based upon circumstance, culture, or family. It may not be ultimately true. And this makes a distinction between what we see in life that's conditioned. It has a birth, a decay, and death, and what's unconditioned, what it always exists, like innate goodness or other qualities of the absolute. There's no birth. It's called the unborn. There's no decay. There's no death. It's always in existence. It's always been in existence. And so we engage in various practices. I emphasize in my teaching the heart practices of Buddhism, what's called the Brahma Viharas. And I teach equanimity, compassion, empathetic joy, and unconditioned love. And when we meet those qualities as qualities of the absolute, we really get that they're unconditioned. I don't need to do anything. I don't need to perform or be a certain way to get access to these qualities. And there's nothing I've done that'll disqualify me. despite the fact most people carry around memories that engender guilt and shame, and we feel the guilt and shame disqualifies us. I can't possibly have access to that rarefied state because I've done bad things. I've been cruel to others. I've been selfish, whatever the story is. And there is truth that we need to work with those prior experiences, change today's behavior, hopefully do forgiveness practice, perhaps make amends. But we can let go of those. Those don't define us completely. It's what we did. It was our behavior. It's not who we are. It's not fundamental. So it's recognizing that and exercising, offering compassion, tenderness to ourselves, to be with the suffering, what we call the dukkha in Buddhism, the unsatisfactoriness of human life. And so we practice maturing the personality. With the Brahma Viharas, we mature our relationship to the different groups of people in our lives, what we call the category of beings. We purify that, we watch our behavior. We can also use the precepts in Buddhism, which are similar to the 10 Commandments of Christianity, if you know those. And we try to live a life that's the most wholesome, a life that benefits not only ourselves, but all others, if possible. In Buddhist language, this reduces the karma that we accumulate, and also it minimizes the memories that we might carry guilt, shame, remorse about. So we're able to be fresher in this moment when we meditate and orient towards the absolute. And at some point, we may have an experience where we put down all the markers of me, all the ways I know myself, and we enter into what I call absence of self, what Buddhism traditionally calls not self or no self. And we put that down, and we're able to see reality. We're able to meet reality, our true nature, the absolute in our consciousness awakens to the absolute. So I language it that awakening means the absolute awakens to itself in a particular consciousness, a particular location. And that is true. And even so, in the process of awakening, we also have the realization that every being is already awake. That's all we're recognizing, is that awakeness is already here. It doesn't need to come from anywhere else. We're just discovering our birthright, what's always here. And so we can call that awakening dawns, because we realize it even though it's always here. Part of us doesn't quite believe it. The second line, eclipse, form and absence. So the absolute is really something that's so fundamental. It's the source of all form, all manifestation and creation, and also of the absence, the emptiness, the lack of substantiality. What's conditioned isn't fundamentally true. Causes and conditions cause what we take to be reality to come into formation. But over time, everything that comes into form is going to decay and die. And so it's not an ultimate truth, it's a relative truth. But awakening eclipses what we hold to be form, what we hold to be absence or emptiness. The absolute contains both, and ironically, it contains neither as well. And that's the paradox of the absolute. It contains all of it. But we recognize we through this process of awakening, we transcend the concepts, the beliefs in form and emptiness to arrive at direct contact. We know the absolute in our own experience. And so that helps us to see through and to, as I say, eclipse form and emptiness. It lets us transcend in a way that we can see the relative, we can see the form and absence, and we're also not bound by it. The third line, no beginning, no end. And that points to the aliveness of the absolute and the fact that it's not conditioned. It's always been in existence. It will always be in existence. We don't need to create it. We don't need to do anything. It's already happening. As humans, we have no control over how the absolute functions. But we can bring ourselves into greater alignment with the absolute. And part of that begins by really exploring this line, no beginning, no end. In the Zen tradition, sometimes it's talked about as the unborn, something that can't be born and can't die. So it's always here. And this is also pointing to time. We hold time conceptually. There's this time, we can subtract minutes and hours and be that time. We can add minutes and hours and be at a different time. But in fact, the only time that really exists is this moment, always this present moment. I sometimes refer to that as the eternal now. We're always just here. There's no place else we can be ever. And yet we feel a flow with time. And because of the flow, we say that time passes. But it doesn't really. It's always this moment. So no beginning, no end. The last line, sever every opinion. Well, as humans, we're fairly famous for holding opinions about almost anything and everything. We have experience, we may reach conclusions from that experience. We hold ideas, our thoughts become concepts. And concepts mean that we're trying to come up with a thought that encapsulates experience. Once we move to concept on any experience, we've taken a step away from the experience. This is true of awakening as well. If someone tries to preserve the experience of awakening, if they try to recreate it, it can't be done. And so they start working with the concept of awakening to try to find that freshness again. I spent a lot of years suffering when I was in the Zen tradition. I had an awakening experience at a fairly young age. And then I spent a number of years trying to recreate that experience, trying to have the exact experience again. And it took me many years before I finally realized it wasn't possible. That was the magic of that moment. And that moment was no longer this moment. So I had to just practice in a fresh way, putting down my opinion, putting down the memory, and ultimately working with the fact that it gave me a sense of specialness that had to be put down as well. Because we come very humbly to the absolute. It doesn't mean we don't have opinions or concepts. It means that we recognize them as being dependent upon a certain situation, a certain perspective. You know, I can look at the world from my position based on age, geography, and experience. And I think the world works in this certain way. Others of you that have different experiences, different ages, you live in different places, had different life experiences, we may not share the same worldview, we may not share the same opinions. And that just shows that opinions are conditioned. They're not ultimate reality. So sever every opinion means being willing to challenge, to question your conclusions, your concept, your opinion of the world, and holding it gently in a way that isn't ultimate. It's not ultimate truth. It's conditioned truth. I can have a view on the world today based on my health as it is. If my health were to worsen, my viewpoint on the world may very well change as well. So we can see that all these different factors influence it. And in the cleanness, the clearness of union with the absolute, of the absolute awakening to itself, in this location, in this moment, we must put down every opinion, we must put down every concept, even the concept of who I take myself to be. I have to be willing to let that go and be fresh. Really like being an infant. Some Zen teachers will talk about that. We have to make ourselves into the mind of the infant or a baby's mind. It just means innocent, with all possibilities, without knowing anything, without cataloging the world in a particular way, being fresh. So I close my commentary in the book with a line that says, "Where are you looking?" So, how are you oriented? Where are you looking from? Where are you looking to? Is what you're seeing the same or different than what's looking? That's what that line, that question invites us to ponder and explore for ourselves.